You may not remember, but you've died before, and not just once. What we call life might be nothing more than a gap between forgettings, a pause in the memory of something your soul has been carrying for centuries. There are ancient accounts, forgotten records, and quiet studies all pointing to the same mystery. Consciousness doesn't begin at birth, and it definitely doesn't end at death. Why doesn't anyone talk about this openly? Maybe because some truths are too inconvenient to reveal. The idea that your current identity is just one piece of a much larger story is far too unsettling to be taught in schools or accepted by mainstream religions. But what if there were an ancient book, hidden for generations, that described the signs you've lived before, with a level of accuracy modern science is only now beginning to understand? In what follows, you'll understand why you've never heard anything about this, and how this secret could change everything. They say some books don't choose readers, they choose moments. And it was during one of those unlikely moments, amid the quiet restoration of an abandoned temple in southern India, that a group of monks found something that felt more like a warning than a discovery. A manuscript wrapped in red silk, sealed with symbols no one could decipher. When they opened it, they found not only ancient Sanskrit writings, but also illustrations that, to observant eyes, seemed to depict bodies floating between dimensions, cords of light linking people to themselves, in different eras. Nothing in it was easy to interpret, but one detail stood out. Beside each figure were numbers etched into the page, coordinates, dates, or account of lives. Experts who had unauthorized access to the content reported an immediate discomfort, as if something was watching through the pages. But the most intriguing thing was the similarity between the manuscript symbols and the patterns found in human brain scans. How could a text over 1,000 years old seem to describe the structure of the brain and the body's electromagnetic field? Some researchers distanced themselves from the study, claiming spiritual disturbances. Others disappeared from academia after sharing their theories on obscure blogs. Most chose silence, but what truly unsettles isn't what was said, it's what was left out. The manuscript's most sensitive content speaks of souls that haven't completed their journeys, trapped in cycles they've forgotten to break. And it describes signs, recurring feelings, emotional patterns, types of dreams that might indicate someone has lived before and may be living again. The most disturbing part? These signs match data uncovered by neuroscientists studying déjà vu, false memories, and multiple personality phenomena. There are patterns that repeat among unconnected individuals, as if they're accessing a database that doesn't belong to them, but still influences them. When shown images from the manuscript, some reported vivid visions and altered states of consciousness. Coincidence? Or a reactivation of memories that were lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to surface? The manuscript also mentions something scholars have called the moment of remembrance. A specific instant, often preceded by a major emotional crisis, when the soul begins to recall why it came here. The word used is smriti, meaning sacred memory. According to the text, not everyone is ready for this, because to remember is not just to recall. It's to carry the weight of what's been lived and the duty not to repeat the same mistakes. But how can you know if this moment has already happened to you, or if it's still ahead? The last pages of the manuscript are damaged, as if someone had deliberately tried to erase them. One passage remains legible. When the signs are ignored, the cycle begins again. But to the one who recognizes, will be given the chance to remember before forgetting once more. What does that really mean? And who exactly doesn't want you to find out? Have you ever felt a deep sadness when hearing music from a place you've never been? Ever gotten chills for no reason upon entering an old house? Or felt inexplicable anguish when looking at a photo from another time? These subtle sensations are often dismissed as emotional coincidence, but some scholars See them as the most visible traces of a memory that didn't originate in this life. Science calls it implicit memory, spirituality, a soul echo. Carl Jung warned of contents that don't belong to the individual consciousness but still influence us. He called them archetypes. But what happens when what you feel doesn't fit into any known archetype? When you see yourself in stories you've never lived, mourn losses that aren't yours, or miss people you've never met, is that still a psychological phenomenon? Or does it begin to cross into the territory of spiritual memory? Researchers of the human psyche have documented cases of people developing phobias, skills, and even foreign accents spontaneously without prior exposure. In tests under deep hypnosis, many of these individuals recounted events that, when investigated, showed connections to actual historical data. Can the brain fabricate false memories? Yes. But what if it's accessing something it couldn't? Possibly invent? What lies beyond the neurological explanation? What if part of what you feel, fear, or long for is being guided by memories from another lifetime? Maybe that's why certain patterns keep repeating, because the unconscious doesn't distinguish past from present. It simply continues, like an underground river trying to surface, even when buried under concrete. But the truly unsettling part is realizing that these strange memories often arise at turning points in life, as if something beyond you is trying to influence the course of your present existence. Some transpersonal therapists believe these impressions can be accessed and reinterpreted, but they warn, remembering is like opening a door without knowing what's on the other side. Some people find answers, others more questions, because reliving doesn't mean understanding, and understanding doesn't mean healing. Some memories can set you free, and others only reveal themselves when the soul is ready not to run from them. But what if these memories aren't just remnants of the past, but messages left by your former self from another age, meant to be read now? What if the life you're living is just the next page in a book you never knew you were writing? There's a principle in quantum physics called entanglement. It states that two particles, even when separated by vast distances, can influence one another instantly, as if connected by a bond beyond space and time. Now imagine, what if your soul is also entangled, but not with someone else, with older versions of yourself? Past lives that, even forgotten, still shape your feelings, choices, and deepest fears. Science is beginning to admit that time might not be linear. Einstein once said, "The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." But if time is a mental construct, then why would the soul need to obey it? Some spiritual traditions claim the soul is multidimensional and that all its incarnations coexist in simultaneous planes. And what if what we call karma is actually the reflection of choices made in parallel realities that still vibrate within you? That idea starts to seem less absurd when we look at studies on out-of-body experiences and expanded states of consciousness. People who've had such experiences often report contact with younger, older, or entirely different versions of themselves, like looking into a mirror. But a mirror that reflects not the now, but the eternal. What do these images mean? Are they projections of the unconscious? Or windows into realities coexisting within a fragmented soul? Depth psychology has suggested that we carry multiple selves within us. But what if some of those selves aren't just symbolic constructs? What if they are echoes of who we truly were, living simultaneously on a level that ordinary consciousness can't reach? Maybe that's why certain pains don't go away, even with therapy. Maybe that's why some dreams feel more real than waking life. The soul, then, wouldn't be a timeline, but a field of overlapping experiences. What you're living now might be a response to something you did, or failed to do, in another time. When feelings seem to come out of nowhere, when decisions feel inevitable, is it just impulse? Or is it a chain reaction set in motion long before you were born? The soul might be guiding you, or holding you accountable, Would you know the difference? But perhaps the most unsettling question of all is this. If you're connected to who you once were, who is connected to who you are yet to become? There are dreams we forget in minutes. Others stay with us for days, or for a lifetime. Who hasn't woken up with the feeling they were somewhere else, living another story, surrounded by faces too familiar to be fictional? Science explains dreams as leftover fragments from the day, memory reorganization, or random electrical activity. But there's something those definitions miss. Why do some dreams leave us with a pain or a beauty we can't explain? Reports of recurring dreams with historical settings, unknown languages, or ancient deaths are more common than one might think. In some cases, the descriptions match real historical details the person never studied. Are these just mental constructs? Or flashes of experiences the rational mind can't process, but the soul never forgot? Is the unconscious merely a storage for trauma? Or is it a vault where ancestral memories are kept? In spiritual traditions from Tibet and India, dreams are seen as doors, not to the future, but to other dimensions of consciousness itself. According to these teachings, when we sleep, the soul partially detaches from the body and can visit realms that transcend time. What if, in dreaming, you're revisiting parts of yourself that don't fit into your current you? What if those dreams are attempts by your deepest self to remind you of what you promised not to forget? Modern neuroscience is already studying the phenomenon of lucid dreaming, when a person becomes aware they're dreaming and can influence the narrative. But there are cases where, even inside the dreamer feels it isn't their own creation, but a memory, as if they were accessing something that really happened, just not in this life. When you wake up with tears in your eyes and no idea why, who was it that actually lived that? Some spiritual therapists claim dreams can carry symbolic codes that point to past lives, repeated deaths, interrupted encounters, places that keep reappearing. But these fragments rarely come whole. They come in pieces, like a buried puzzle. And those who dare to put those pieces together must be brave enough to face what may surface. Because to remember, in this case, is to relive. But what if the most intense dreams aren't metaphors or symbolic messages? What if they are real returns to lives that are still crying out for closure? Some marks aren't on the skin, but in what the skin hides. There are children born with intense phobias, birthmarks in specific places, or persistent pains with no medical explanation. Many of these symptoms are treated as isolated anomalies, but some of the stories behind these marks defy logic. A boy born with an uncontrollable fear of fire and a mark on his chest, years later described a death by burning in detail he was never taught. Traditional medicine still can't fully explain these phenomena, but some scientists are beginning to look at epigenetics, the science that studies how trauma can be passed down through generations without altering the DNA itself. If a fear can be inherited biologically, could it also be inherited spiritually? Could the body remember what the mind was forced to forget? How do we explain scars that don't belong to any known story? In deep hypnosis sessions, there are astonishing reports of people who, while reliving a supposed past life, describe injuries that match chronic pains they've always had. After the process, those pains disappear. Therapists call this cellular memory release. But what if the body is actually a silent archive, holding layers of memories the soul hasn't yet learned to translate into words? What happens when the body speaks and no one listens? In Indian tradition, there's a concept called samskaras, subtle impressions that remain in the soul and manifest through the body in other lives. Not as punishment, but as a sign. The mark you carry might be a map, and the pain you feel, a message. But how do you decode it? And how do you know if what you're suffering now comes from something that didn't even happen in this lifetime? Psychosomatics tries to explain. Spirituality offers clues, but neither has all the answers. Have you ever wondered why certain traumas don't respond to any treatment? Why even after years of therapy, certain pains still pulse? Maybe it's because they don't belong only to this existence. Maybe it's because they're not in the now, but in what lies behind it. And until they're heard, they'll keep repeating, like a sour note that won't stop playing. But what if the healing you seek isn't in the future, but in a past your soul never stopped carrying? Have you ever stopped in an unfamiliar place and thought, I've been here before? There's no logic, no one confirms it, nothing in your conscious memory explains it. But the feeling is so real it seems truer than any memory. Déjà vu is still one of the mind's most mysterious phenomena. Science associates it with a brain processing glitch, as if a current experience is mistakenly recorded as an old memory. But what if it's not an error? What if it's access? Ancient peoples believed déjà vu was a kind of spiritual awakening, a brief moment when the soul recognizes something the body hasn't lived yet. As if, for a second, the veil between lives lifts and lets a sliver of light in. No one knows exactly why these moments happen, but they often come with a deep, inexplicable emotion, nostalgia, anxiety, peace, or even fear. What does that mean? In physics, some propose the idea of multiple realities coexisting. What if déjà vu is the point where two timelines briefly cross, revealing that you faced this choice before in another version of yourself? Or, more mysteriously, that you're exactly where your soul hoped you'd be? Like a subtle reminder that there's a hidden script being followed, even when everything feels like chaos. Some mystical traditions say déjà vu is a whisper from karma, a turning point, a crucial moment where a decision made in the past is being revisited. And what if that place, that person, or that situation that feels so familiar is a repetition of something you need to do differently this time? Déjà vu wouldn't just be a memory, but a second chance. There are also those who say that in those moments, the body vibrates in sync with experiences from past lives. The environment, the circumstances, even smells and sounds can trigger an old memory, stored not in the mind, but in the soul. As if each déjà vu were a tiny spark of remembrance trying to reignite a forgotten flame. But what if we're ignoring those signs? What if they're part of a puzzle we're trying to solve with pieces we pretend not to see? What if déjà vu aren't coincidences, but codes? Codes that indicate time isn't what we think it is, and that your soul, deep down, knows exactly where it's been and where it's trying to lead you? There are encounters that defy logic. You meet someone for the first time, but it feels like a reunion. The look is familiar, the gesture known, the silence between you heavy with untold stories. And then comes that silent question echoing inside. Where do I know this person from? Science might call it synchronicity, interpersonal chemistry, or attachment patterns. But what if it's something more? What if that kind of connection is actually the reflection of ancient bonds, shared past lives? According to some schools of transpersonal psychology, our most intense relationships, whether loving or conflicting, don't arise by chance. They carry emotional weight that predates this life. Encounters that move us too deeply or destabilize us for no rational reason might be continuations of stories left unfinished. You've never seen that person, but your soul remembers. And what if what you call affinity is simply the memory of a bond that was never broken? There are stories of people who, upon looking into a stranger's eyes, feel an immediate, almost painful connection. Some experience sensations like déjà vu, others feel fear, or a love so overwhelming it becomes uncomfortable. These encounters are called karmic reunions in some traditions. But what exactly is being reunited? A former lover? An enemy? Someone you made a promise to and haven't fulfilled yet? And more importantly, how do you know if that bond is one of healing or repetition? Quantum physics suggests that everything in the universe is interconnected, and that energetic connections can survive time and space. Could our most intense emotional bonds follow that same logic? And if, in meeting someone again, we're reactivating an ancient energy field, a shared frequency that survived death and forgetfulness? The soul recognizes before the mind understands. But what it does with that recognition depends on your willingness to listen. These reunions aren't always harmonious. Sometimes recognition sparks friction, rejection, even repulsion. As if something inside us warns, this has happened before, and it didn't end well. In such cases, is the soul trying to prevent a repetition or offering a chance for redemption? Perhaps both. What's certain is that the more intense the feeling, the deeper the bond seems to be, and the greater the possibility that something is being reenacted under new masks. But what if all these people who cross our path with disproportionate intensity are part of the same script? Recurring characters in a story that unfolds across different lifetimes, like chapters of a book you forgot you started writing? Close your eyes for a moment. Think about all that you've already forgotten. Faces, names, smells, childhood fears. Now imagine how many other things might be buried even deeper, beyond conscious memory. The subconscious is like a locked basement, dark, silent, but alive. Inside it aren't just the traumas of this life, but also traces of experiences your rational mind never lived, yet somehow still shape who you are. Freud said the unconscious governs over 90% of our decisions. Jung went further. He claimed that within us lives a collective unconscious, an ancestral psychic layer shared by all humanity. But some say there is an even deeper level, where individual memories from past incarnations rest. Past experiences, repressed emotions, old promises. It's not just what's repressed. It's what was lived before the now. During hypnotic regression sessions, people access vivid memories of eras they've never studied. Precise descriptions of ancient clothing, geographic locations, forgotten vocabularies. Is the brain creating this, or simply retrieving it? If the mind is an antenna, as some neuroscientists suggest, perhaps the subconscious is the channel through which old lives still transmit their messages. And what isn't heard ends up repeating until it's understood. Curiously, many of these reports are filled with intense emotion, tears, anguish, relief. They're not just stories, they're reunions. The body reacts as if it's truly reliving something that never happened in this life. Science is still hesitant to accept this evidence, but what do we say when the experience transforms the individual, changes behavioral patterns, and relieves chronic pain? Is the subconscious just a dump of emotional junk? Or the true archive of the soul? Perhaps the scariest part isn't what's stored there, but the fact that everything repressed continues to act. It responds in your choices, your relationships, your irrational fears. It's as if forgotten parts of you are driving your life from behind a curtain. You think you're in control, but who's really making the decisions? And what if what you call intuition is just a memory trying to warn you again? But what if there's a way to access that hidden level with clarity? What if the key to understanding the present lies in the stories you don't even know you've lived? Imagine an invisible library where every thought, emotion, choice, and experience of every living being, since the beginning of time, is recorded. Not on paper, but in a kind of subtle, vibrational field that transcends matter. This is the idea behind the Akashic records, mentioned in ancient Eastern traditions and rediscovered by modern mystics and scholars. Science still hesitates to embrace it. But interestingly, quantum physics already talks about information fields that permeate everything. Physicist Ervin Laszlo suggests that we live immersed in a cosmic field of information, which he called the Akashic field. For him, this field not only records, but connects all events in the universe. But what if this record also stores who you were, what you chose, what you left unfinished? And what if, when visiting certain places, meeting certain people, or going through particular experiences, you were, unknowingly, accessing fragments of these records? People in deep meditative states or near-death experiences often describe a moment of life review, as if their actions, thoughts, and intentions were shown to them like scenes from a movie. But some go further. They describe other lives, other stories, other versions of themselves, not as imagination, but as readings of something that was always there. The rational mind resists, but the soul recognizes. And what if it's possible to access this memory bank in a conscious state? Some traditions teach methods to do so: guided visualizations, specific meditations, shamanic practices. Those who delve into it describe sensations of profound truth, as if something long forgotten had finally surfaced. It's not about seeing the future. It's about remembering the past that still pulses within you, and that perhaps continues to influence everything you are today. But there is a risk. Accessing these records without preparation can awaken pains that were asleep for a reason. Not every past is ready to be revisited. There are wounds that, though invisible, still bleed, and memories that, once reactivated, can completely change how you see who you are and why you're here. Because sometimes remembering also means rediscovering an ancient mission, a forgotten purpose. But what if this field really exists and is within your reach at all times? What exactly is waiting to be read? And more importantly, what will happen when you finally remember? A child, only 3 years old, points to a city they've never visited and firmly says, "I used to live there." Elsewhere in the world, a little girl speaks a language her parents don't recognize and that she's never been exposed to. Later, it turns out to be an extinct language. These stories, often dismissed as imagination, have been recorded in detail by researchers for decades. Among them, psychiatrist Ian Stevenson, who documented over 2,000 cases of children with past life memories, many with historical verification. What's most unsettling is that these memories emerge with emotional clarity far beyond fantasy. Children describe how they died, identify old family members, even share names that match records of people who lived before they were born. When taken to the described locations, they recognize homes, objects, even relatives of the former self. How do we explain that without touching on the concept of reincarnation? Traditional science steps back, but the data remains and continues to grow. Some of these children develop traumas that seem to come from nowhere: fear of water, of fire, of weapons. In certain cases, these phobias match exactly the causes of death described in their memories. There's no consistent neurological explanation that accounts for such precision. But what if the soul, upon reincarnating, doesn't erase everything? What if parts of the previous life still echo into the new experience, like persistent fragments crossing time? Interestingly, these memories often fade around age 7, as if something closes. Some spiritualists say that when we're born, we're still more on the other side than fully present here, and that it's only over time, through the conditioning of the world, that this channel shuts. But why would these memories surface in the first place? Is it a calling, a plea for resolution, or just the last flicker of something that doesn't want to be forgotten? In many of these cases, the children only find relief when they're able to tell their story, or when they visit the place from their past life. After that, silence, as if the soul needed to be heard, acknowledged, in order to move on. And what if that's exactly it? What if unacknowledged memory is what anchors inexplicable pain, patterns, and blocks that run through an entire lifetime? But what if forgetting is just an interval, and remembering a choice made long before birth? If these children remember, what might you still be carrying, but never had the courage to hear? Have you noticed how certain patterns keep repeating in your life? relationships that always end the same way, opportunities that slip away at the last moment, fears that return even after being faced. It's as if an invisible script is being followed, scene by scene, despite all your efforts to change. Are we merely living out the effects of unconscious choices, or is there something much deeper behind the repetition? Some spiritual schools teach that the soul carries unfinished lessons, and that each life is a new attempt to resolve what wasn't resolved before. What looks like bad luck may simply be a lesson being offered again, not as punishment, but as necessity. You can change cities, jobs, partners, but until the pattern is understood, it repeats, because its origin isn't outside. It's in something you brought with you at birth. In depth psychology, Jung called this a complex, emotional nuclei that manifest automatically, as if they have a life of their own. But what if some of these complexes are echoes of previous lives? Old scenes replayed with new actors, the same script in different costumes. Maybe that's why certain situations affect us more than they should. Because it's not the first time we're living them. We just don't remember the others. What if the hardest challenges in your life are actually invitations to break an ancestral cycle? The anger that returns, the abandonment that repeats, the feeling of not belonging. None of it is random. Maybe you're living the same dilemma from centuries ago, and now you finally have the chance to do things differently. But how do you break a cycle you didn't even know had begun? Some traditions call this a karmic knot, a point of tension that only loosens when you bravely face what has been hidden. It's not enough to wish for a new life. You have to recognize the stories still vibrating inside you, stories that may not have even started in this lifetime. And that may be waiting, silently, for the right moment to be resolved. But what if, right now, you're living the same scene for the 100th time, and everything depends on the next thing you say? In medieval cathedrals across Europe, there are details most people overlook. Symbols hidden under plaster, marks carved into stone, figures that don't belong to Christian iconography. Among the angels and saints appear spirals, serpents, all-seeing eyes. Some of these images trace back to pagan traditions, others to mysteries far older. Why are these elements found inside temples that officially deny any doctrine outside? The one truth? During the early centuries of Christianity, many thinkers of the faith openly spoke of reincarnation. Origen, one of the Church Fathers, suggested that the soul existed before birth and returned to the flesh to evolve. But in the 6th century, during the Second Council of Constantinople, this idea was banned from sacred texts. The doctrine of reincarnation was silenced. Why? Some say that a people who believe they have only one life are easier to control. Despite that, the memory didn't disappear. Secret orders, silent monks, persecuted mystics, all preserve the idea of the soul's continuity through codes and symbols. Cathedrals don't just speak with words, they speak with light and shadow, with architecture, with silence. What if these temples are more than places of worship? What if they're repositories of forgotten truths, disguised in the language of the sacred? There are records of manuscripts found in cloistered monasteries containing teachings about successive lives, karmic missions, and spiritual trials between incarnations. Writings that never made it to the altars, texts that were never meant to be shared, because someone who knows they've lived before begins to question why they're here. And that kind of awareness has always disturbed established power. But silence is not always forgetting. Sometimes it's strategy. In many ancient rituals, everything was transmitted orally. The symbols carved in stone, repeated in stained glass. Frescoes, Vitruvian hidden circles, they're still there, waiting for those with eyes to see. Like veiled doors, ready to be opened by those who can read beyond words and hear what was never said. But what if the real reason for hiding reincarnation wasn't just about control, but something even greater, something that could change how we see time, the soul, and even God? Science teaches that energy is never lost. It only transforms. It's one of the fundamental laws of physics. But if everything we are is condensed energy, what happens to that force when the body stops working? The heart stops, the brain goes silent, and yet reports of persistent consciousness continue to emerge. Near-death experiences, testimonies of people who, even with no detectable brain activity, vividly describe what they saw, heard, and felt outside their bodies. These accounts are eerily similar. A sensation of floating, of detachment, of observing without being involved. Many say they saw themselves from above, heard conversations, sensed their loved ones' emotions. Some describe an intense light, a comforting presence, even a life review, as if they were watching themselves from the outside. If consciousness depends on the brain, how is that possible? Is the soul merely unplugging from the flesh temporarily? Some scientists, like Dr. Sam Parnia, have been documenting these cases with rigorous methodology. And the findings are unsettling. These aren't just hallucinations. Patients describe details they could never have known, events that occurred on other floors, at times when they were clinically dead. Something beyond the body seems to perceive, something that watches, even when all physical function ceases. In spirituality, this is nothing new. Many traditions speak of a subtle body, an energetic field that persists after physical death. The Chinese call it qi, Hindus call it prana, and Kabbalists call it nefesh. The names differ. The idea is the same. The body dies, but something remains. The soul, then, would be more than a belief. It would be the natural continuity of consciousness, a link between existences flowing like the stations of an endless journey. If that consciousness survives, what does it carry? Just memories? Or also unfinished matters, bonds, incomplete lessons? What you do now, then, doesn't end with your death. It continues. If the soul is intelligent energy, it records, carries, transforms, and returns. In another time, another body, but perhaps with the same questions. Death, in this view, is no longer an end. It's merely a transition between realities. But what if all of this is just the beginning of a much greater discovery? What if science is slowly being pushed to the edge of something far beyond what we call life, and far beyond what we call death? And what if the exact moment of your birth, the day, the hour, the place, wasn't a coincidence, but a choice? Not made by your parents, nor by genetic chance, but by your soul before reincarnating. This idea, though unsettling, appears in various ancient spiritual traditions. It's said that before returning to Earth, the soul envisions the life it will live, the challenges, the meetings, the losses, the lessons. And faced with this panorama, it accepts or declines. As hard as it may seem, some souls choose intense incarnations marked by pain, poverty, abandonment, not as punishment, but for evolutionary necessity, like advanced training. If the soul has lived through many lifetimes, it may seek specific experiences to complete a cycle of learning. A difficult life, then, isn't bad luck, it's purpose. But who would have the courage to accept such a mission with no guarantee of remembering? In esoteric astrology, there's talk of astral marks, specific points in the natal chart that indicate what the soul came to develop and what it carries from past lives. The so-called lunar nodes, for example, point to old paths and future directions. But they're not just maps, they're contracts. The soul signs agreements before incarnating, with other souls, with situations, with challenges, like pieces of a greater game that only makes sense when you see the whole board. But at birth, we forget. Why? Maybe because remembering everything would take away the authenticity of the experience. Maybe because forgetting is part of the test. Intuition, signs, deeply moving encounters. All of that would be part of the process of remembering without knowing. And when you feel like you already knew something, when something feels right without explanation, maybe it's the echo of that memory trying to emerge. A reminder of an old agreement. Many people report feeling like their lives don't quite fit, like they were born in the wrong place, the wrong family, the wrong time. But what if this is exactly the life your soul chose? Not for ease, but for the precision of the learning. The parents you had, the country where you were born, the body you inhabit, all of it might be a carefully chosen setting for the development of something greater, invisible, but essential. And what if the choice your soul made wasn't just for you, but for others too? What if your presence here is the missing piece for another soul to awaken? Before birth, some traditions say the soul passes through a final moment of lucidity, a moment when everything makes sense. It sees who it was, understands who it will be, recognizes the bonds it will meet again. But then, a veil descends. A necessary forgetting covers it all, because to truly live is only possible when you don't have all the answers. The challenge is to remember, without knowing you forgot. But what if that veil is beginning to lift? There are signs that this forgetting is becoming more fragile. Intense dreams, frequent synchronicities, sensations of, "I already knew this," premonitions that come true. It's as if the invisible plane is getting closer, as if the barrier between the visible and the hidden is becoming translucent. Souls are awakening faster, remembering sooner, sensing that there is more than routines and obligations. But what exactly is being remembered? Some children are born speaking of where they were before, describing places, beings, and even missions. But over time, these memories fade, worn away by culture, language, rules. And yet, certain adults continue to feel there's something more, something they lost at birth, a nameless longing, a mapless search. And what if that restlessness isn't anxiety, but a memory trying to be reborn? In Greek mythology, there was the river Lethe, whose waters caused souls to forget before reincarnating. They would drink to forget who they had been. But there was also the river Mnemosyne, the one that allowed remembrance. According to the ancients, a soul that drank from it would recover the knowledge of all its past lives. And what if we are, right now, standing at the banks of these two rivers, one pulling us toward forgetting, the other toward remembering? Which one would you choose? The veils are falling in subtle ways, not through words, but through experiences. What you feel can't be explained might be exactly what your soul is trying to reveal. Fragments of memory, flashes of truth, intuitions that seem to come from nowhere. But nothing comes from nowhere. Maybe they're pieces of a larger puzzle that only starts to fit when you stop searching with your eyes and start remembering with your heart. But what if, upon crossing the final veil, you not only remembered who you were, but also realized that who you are now is just part of something much, much greater, and that the life you're living is only one of the many stories your soul still wants to tell?